Hey everyone, so this is a video that has been requested for a while now where I go through the tips that I've gathered throughout the many months that I've been running Mythic Plus. I've been running Mythic Plus since Legion first launched. It's pretty much the one aspect in the game right now that I feel is still challenging, and I'm very competitive, so being able to push for higher keys is something that I really enjoy. And honestly, without it, I feel like there wouldn't be much in the game for me to do anymore because I don't raid. But I will be talking about my class, the gear that I wear, the talents that I choose, even though there is not a lot of diversity for Shadow Priests, and um, useful stuff for you to bring to Mythic Plus. Anything else I can think of that would be useful knowledge, because I know for new players it's a lot of information that they can't learn on their own always. I had friends that started the game late, and if they wanted to get into Mythic Plus, it was a bit frustrating for them because they would join pubs and it would be lower keys where you just kill everything and you wouldn't learn anything. Or if you join higher keys, there are enough things that you just don't know, and not knowing that information can be very, it can just be enough to cause wipes or, make this run not smooth. And most of the times, people expect you to know this information already because these dungeons have been out for a while, and they also don't consider the factor that not everybody runs them very often. So hopefully this information will be helpful. I won't be going into too much detail per dungeon because that's just too much information, and I feel like it's better if I do individual dungeon videos. So this will focus more on general stuff. Okay, first I'm going to talk about any items that you should bring to Mythic Plus just to be fully prepared. I'm mostly going to be talking about it in a pushing key capacity, so it might be more than you'll need for medium level keys, but hopefully still good information for you to know in the future if you decide to do higher keys and want to, bring as much as you can that can give you an advantage. So first, you want to have Drums of Fury. There's also another version of this. I don't remember the names, but there's one for this expansion and there's one for last expansion. I think this is the one for last expansion. But basically, it's heroism for classes that don't have it. It is 5% less compared to the real one that you get from mages and shamans. So obviously theirs is better. If there's one in the party, don't use drums. Let them use theirs. Um, Obviously, having something like this is extremely important. You will need it anytime you're pushing keys and you don't have one of those classes in your party. And don't forget also to pay attention to the debuff, because there have been times where I would use it on a boss fight at the start and realize that there's still a minute or two left on the debuff. So when you use it, I think it goes on a 2-minute cooldown or something, which could mess things up depending on how long the debuff has left over. So just remember to pay attention to the debuff and not overlap use of it. Next, we have Potion of Prolonged Power. This one is generally self-explanatory in the sense that it provides you with stats and is a potion that should be used throughout the entire dungeon. Uh, Ideal use of this is to pre-pot outside of combat, because if you do that, then the cooldown starts counting down immediately from 1 minute. However, if you use it in combat, the countdown won't begin until you drop combat. So, say you start a pull, you're doing trash, and you pot in combat, and say the trash takes like 1 to 2 minutes. Once it ends, though, you won't be able to use that pot for a whole minute after, and by then you'll most likely be pulling the next group and all of that, so you'll be missing some pot usage there. So Ideally, if you can help it, try to use it always outside of combat and as early as possible just to get that timer going down. I like to use it at the beginning of the dungeon, the second the countdown starts from 10, depending on what dungeon it is. So for Court of Stars, you don't want to pot in the very beginning because the boat phase takes about a minute. Same with Neltharians, I don't use it until I land in the water. So pay attention to stuff like that. And if you're approaching a boss, try to not pot actually, unless you can ensure that it won't be on cooldown when you're going to pre-pot for the pool. So, Potion of Prolonged Power, if you want to push higher keys, try to get in the habit of using them throughout the entire dungeon because they will provide a very meaningful buff to your damage, which is very important when you're pushing for time. Okay, the next one is pretty simple. Ancient healing potions are great that more people should get into the habit of using if they want to push higher keys. They are pretty cheap. They're very easy to make, and they heal for 500,000 instantly. So it's very useful to get in the habit of using them. You can use them multiple times in a dungeon, and they are definitely lifesavers. So avoid health stones if possible, and have your own stash of ancient healing potions because they are honestly so much better. Next is very selective depending on the dungeon. Drainic invisibility potions are used semi-often depending on the dungeon. The popular ones are Blackrock Hold. People often invis the first hallway of trash because they are actually pretty difficult, and you know, skipping them saves a lot of time. Um, Also, Darkheart Thicket, the very last trash pack before the final boss, is tough as well, and people often skip that trash also. So really, it's nice to have a stack in your bags just to anticipate situations where your group wants to skip trash packs. They're pretty cheap, especially if you buy the Drainic ones, so always useful to have around. The next one I've actually never used in a dungeon because I was bad and didn't do my research, and I didn't realize that they're usable by anybody, not just engineers. I thought that they were profession specific, but um, basically you just put one down when you're about to wipe and you stand next to it, and after everybody dies and trash resets, it will resurrect people in a small radius. Um, Definitely super useful. I'm kind of disappointed that I haven't been using them. I know people in my party have used them from time to time, but I didn't realize anybody could use them. So I'm probably going to start getting in the habit of using it. Next one is very, very obvious, Flask. It's just a buff to your damage. I think on tyrannical weeks, depending on the dungeon, I would say it might be useful to use a stamina flask, but it's really dependent. I think sometimes when I play Holy, I use a stamina flask because Holy is extremely squishy and it can be a little frustrating dying to things that other classes don't get one shot by. So at times that could be useful, but flask is pretty much mandatory always. The next one is actually I've been using this really often and I like it. It's very minor on the list of stuff you want for Mythic Plus, but I just find it useful because there's times where uh, my food buff is running out, and just eating a bacon to extend it saves me food. I haven't actually checked the cost of crispy bacon on the auction house because early Legion, one of my friends made a crap ton of bacon and gave it to each of us because he was leveling cooking. So I had a bunch in my bank and I haven't ran out yet. So I don't know if the cost of bacon is cheaper than the cost of 375 food, but I assume it is, so I just like to use it. And then the last one is just Auto Hammer. There's specific dungeons where you can't mount up, and having a repair is really useful, especially if you've been wiping a lot. Uh, I it's just super useful to carry around, and it's nice to be that person who comes prepared. So I highly recommend carrying all of this stuff in your bags if you're serious about pushing Mythic Plus. Hopefully, all of that was useful information, and now I'll be going into my gear. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my gear. I use 3 sets for Mythic Plus: a single target set, a trash DPS set, and a set with Pride as, just for specific bosses that have hard hitting abilities that are imperative to keep you alive. Um, this set that I'm showing you right now is single target. It's belt legendary with Sefu's. Even if there's boss fights where you can't proc the ring, it's still worth using. I base this off of How to Priest. They have a tier list on their website, and honestly, I reference them very frequently, so I highly recommend reading through that for any specific information. I don't theory craft myself, I just do my research, I guess. So I have the 4 piece. I pretty much just pug normal and heroic Tomb of Sargeras every week as much as possible. Although when it comes to heroic for the first few weeks, I wasn't able to get that many kills. Um, but I am kind of low, I feel like, for my haste. Um, How to Priest recommends 13,000, and this is quite a ways away, but I feel like it's the best that I can do right now. I have been rather lucky with my drops and items for my cache, I feel like, because for someone that doesn't raid, 930 item level equipped is actually extremely high. So I guess I'm just extremely lucky. I recently got the Tarnished Sentinel Medallion trinket. I didn't have it actually for any of my previous videos, so previously I was using Spectral Thurible, which is more like an AoE trinket, but it works pretty well, I think, for single target. Like it's pretty high up there. Um, I have the 2 piece set bonus from Court of Stars and Arcway. Honestly, though, if I got a neck that had haste on it, I would probably be using it. I would sim it first to see if it did more, but I feel like it would, just because more haste could always be helpful, and I'm not sure if the 2 piece bonus is enough of a buff to make up for that lack of haste, especially because it's just a proc. I do actually really like this trinket. I didn't focus on it much before in the past, but the proc rate is pretty varied. There are times where I feel like it procs a lot, but then when I check logs after, it maybe only proc twice. So maybe every time it procs, I just get the feeling that, oh, this is a pretty high proc rate, but it might not be. Oh, and also for my weapon, I have decent item level relics in there. This 941 is just extremely lucky. Um, okay, so my trashed set is really just one swap to get wrists, and then I have a 915 crit haste belt to make up for the loss of the legendary belt. Um, this should actually be switched to Spectral Thurible, so let me save that. And the explanation for this is really just if you have more than one target, especially for trash, there will be multiple targets. So you'll be able to gain a ton of stacks very quickly, and it's going to make your Void Bolt hit extremely hard. That's mainly the explanation for it. The tier list also shows that the chest legendary works very well for trash, and I actually wasn't aware about it until recently. Somebody mentioned it in the comments. I haven't obtained that legendary yet, and I'm not really sure I care to very much, because lately I've been focusing on trying to get better holy legendaries. But if you have the chest, I would definitely recommend using chest and wrist for trash in Mythic Plus. And then the last one, like I mentioned, is just Pride as for survivability. It helps a ton. It's up every 30 seconds. So for certain bosses, like last boss in Darkheart Thicket, I highly recommend it. First boss in Darkheart Thicket, if you are the designated person that is tanking the cat leaps, I would definitely recommend wearing Pride as. And even trash, like Fortified, Darkheart Thicket again, the first few pulls in that dungeon are challenging because the cat leaps hit very hard. And although it won't save you if two of them target you at the same time, you'll get one shot. Just having it though is helpful, and survival is always more important than a little bit of loss of DPS than if you were a different legendary. So this is the sets that I use. I switch between them pretty often in Mythic Plus. Um, you really have to just practice and get used to it, because in the beginning I didn't feel like creating sets. I felt like that was really try hard, and it seemed like it would be something I would take a while to get used to, but I actually adjusted to it pretty quickly and learned the key bindings for what I would need. So definitely, if you want to challenge yourself and try to push yourself to do better, I would definitely recommend creating separate sets for the many different scenarios that you come across in Mythic Plus. Okay, I'm going to go over my talents. Um, there really isn't much that I change pretty often for every tier, aside from the level 90 tier is always the same. In previous patches, I did use SL instead of Auspicious Spirits, but I actually am not positive that was the right choice, because with AS, it's very advantageous to use it when there's multiple targets, because you get more chances to generate an apparition, and then each apparition gives you insanity. So it could allow you to maintain your void form much longer than normal on trash packs with multiple mobs. And then you can also factor in the Mind Flay, Mind Seer passive, which generates even more the more targets it hits. For Misery, I love using Misery, but of course that's personal preference. For Tyrannical weeks, I still tend to use Misery for most of the dungeons, just because there are a lot of times where I've experimented not using it when it was Tyrannical week, but then I just wouldn't like how long it took to dot up the mobs for certain trash packs that had a lot of them in it. And then there would be specific dungeons like Court of Stars where the impact, even though it's not a Tyrannical week, they still need to be killed very quickly. And as a Shadow Priest without Misery, my AoE damage would be atrocious on that pack, and then I wouldn't be able to contribute as much, and I think it would be a large factor that could contribute to the group wiping, because we aren't killing them fast enough. So even though Court of Stars is a dungeon that requires high single target for the last boss, second boss requires AoE for the imps also, but I would still always take Misery for that dungeon. Um, there are only 3 dungeons that I would take Mindmender on for Tyrannical Week, and those are Eye of Ashara, Notharian's Lair, and Maw of Souls. And that's mostly just because they have smaller packs. Each pull doesn't have more than 3 usually. It just depends on how your tank is pulling, but they do have smaller packs that I can think of. Of course, Eye of Ashar do have crabs and uh, goblins or gilblins or whatever the hell they're called, but they have less health than other large packs like that. And if you have 2 other classes that deal a lot of AoE damage, then you could afford to give up that talent for stronger single target damage. But of course, it really always depends on group composition and stuff like that. Um, I don't feel like I often group with classes that have very high AoE damage. So in general, I just really like to use Misery. Like I said earlier, it's personal preference, but that's just what I am the most comfortable with. So I did actually want to talk about the other classes, or at least I intended to when I was planning out this video and what points I wanted to bring up, but I realized that a lot of the individual tips that I had for the variety of classes and what they bring, some of them refer to specific instances in dungeons that would be very difficult for people to follow if they're not familiar with it, or if I didn't give a visual reference. And I felt like managing to obtain all of those visual references would be very difficult, or if I managed to, it would take forever. So, um, me just explaining stuff like that probably wouldn't be good enough, so I figured I would just leave it out. For more individual priest tips, though, I would probably include those in future dungeon videos, like specific ones. I do have an IFS Shara 18 that I didn't end up uploading, so I could use that as a reference for a dungeon guide that could be my next upload. But I know this was more of a general video, and I wasn't sure if this is exactly what people were asking for, so I do hope it's useful. There were other aspects of it that I did kind of want to talk about, like releasing spirit and when it's good to not release spirit. And I touched upon that in a previous dungeon video, I believe. So stuff like that is probably dungeon specific instead of a general idea because it varies depending on, spawn points and stuff like that, which is more relevant towards specific dungeons. But if anyone still has questions that I did not answer in the video, please let me know in the comments section. If there's other aspects of Mythic Plus that I did not think of that you would like me to do a video on, you can let me know also, and I'll try my best to fulfill that. So, thank you guys for watching.